Welcome to the Win, Make, Give podcast. This is Ben Kinney. Today, I'm joined with Chad Himes and Bob Stewart. A little different episode today because we want you all to know that we listen in our Facebook group, which is, Chad?
Facebook.com/group/win-make-give.
So easy. One of our members, as we would call them, asked a question, and his name is Cameron. And Cameron said, I'm currently 23, currently in school, love the Well series, but I realize that some of these tools would be more valuable, tangible if blah, blah, blah. He had some different knowledge. So what he wanted to know was, hey, what would our advice be, Bob, Chad, and myself, Ben, that you would give somebody his age in the financial, social, physical, emotional, spiritual? Like, what advice would you give a 23-year-old? And when I read that, I thought to myself, that's a really great episode. What advice would you give to your younger self? And then all of a sudden I realized that Cameron doesn't think that we are close to the same age. he basically just said, these three old dudes, they probably have some wisdom because they've been around a way a long time. So Cameron, from a bunch of old dudes hanging out in a room, we're going to talk to you a lot about our younger selves and what we would say to them.
Yeah, I got 50 coming around the corner on me, so I got a lot of experience, I guess, in younger self.
What is this idea of famous future times, Chad?
Well, you know, Ben, when we were thinking about our younger selves, of course, there's dates we think back to and all of that. And I just think it's pretty amazing growing up. Again, Cameron wouldn't know this. He's 23 years old. But we remember watching Back to the Future maybe when it came out in the theaters.
The dual flux capacitor?
Thank you very much. You know, so you remember it. Yet here's the amazing thing, Ben. When they went to the future, they went to 2015. They went to 5 years ago when they went to the future.
Good thing they didn't pick 2020.
Would have been very interesting. You know, and Terminator, we all remember Terminator, those of us who grew up back in the 80s and the 90s and all that.
Yeah, because Skynet was going to take over the whole world.
In 1997.
1997?
That was the year, August 29th, 1997, Skynet becomes aware. And now look at us. Now we're just dealing with the coronavirus.
Ironically close to the time that social networks started launching.
Interesting. Yes. Just wanted to know some of those times that happened that we grew up looking forward to, waiting for what it would be like in 2015 to have a hoverboard or a flying car. Yeah, didn't happen though.
So if you're listening to this and you remember things like Tom Petty, Guns N' Roses, Red Dawn,
The original, thank you, right? If you watched all four Rockies or 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever they had in a row in the 90s, right? You're one of us. There you go.
If you don't know what Candlebox, Counting Crows, right? Better Than Ezra, like what would you guys add to the list of things that people our age would know about that these others don't?
Tone Loc.
Duran.
Tone Loc? Are you kidding me?
He's going good, you know. Will Smith,
thing.
when he was actually before he was even the Fresh Prince. Before he was even the Fresh Prince.
Right?
He was just some rapper. Come on.
Yeah. What else, Bob?
I don't know what else from my childhood. I loved Transformers, He-Man. There's a lot of cartoons. The original Scooby-Doo. I watched this Scooby-Doo that they put out for my kids now, and they sound different and they like act different, and I'm like confused by it.
Scooby-Doo!
Isn't it amazing, though? All the things from our childhood is what's coming out now because we are the ones with the money that are taking our kids to these things for those experiences.
That's true. They're pulling on our heartstrings to get us to spend money for our own children.
I mean, who would go to a He-Man movie except for you, Bob?
I'd be there.
I had all the He-Man collection. Like,
of course you did.
They're mostly stolen because we were super poor, but I did have like some random He-Man figures. Well, Cameron, our first bit of advice is listen to 80s music,
That's right.
watch 80s movies,
Yes.
right? Play 80s video games.
Yes.
But we're going to dive into a little bit more, ladies and gentlemen, and I want you to think about this for yourself. What would you tell your younger self, or what would you tell somebody else who has plenty of time to not make the same mistakes that all of us have made?
And that's the key that you say right there, Ben, because of course we can't go back in time. We do not have the DeLorean. We can't do it. Yet by looking at ourselves and saying, this is the advice I would have given myself when I was in my 20s or my 30s or my teens or whenever, I can now look at my daughter and give her that advice now because I know I wish I had known it then. So it's everybody here remembering, look at yourself. Yet at the same time, who can you go share this with?
So the areas we're going to talk about today are health, obviously wealth and money, time, social, emotional, spiritual, maybe even career, right? Mindset. We're going to talk about some of these areas, some of these things that we wish we would have known, or we wish we would have invested time in learning or becoming masters of, or things we wouldn't have let slip by in our lives. So before we jump into this, if we were to just narrow it down to one concept, what would you say, Chad, that you would want to tell your younger self that this person needs to know?
Wow. One concept for all of it. Wow. That's a good one, Ben. I would probably narrow it down to, it's harder to fix it after the fact. Do it right first.
Good one. Bob, what would you say?
I would say, Cameron appears to be on the right path already, which is, it's basically what we talked about in that wealth series. And we've, David Goggins has said this before, but it's this, become financially literate, but realize nobody's coming to save you in that arena. Right? Like nobody, you don't learn this in school. You don't learn financial literacy in college even. Most of our parents don't share this with us. So, he has a leg up because he did mention that he took the wealth series, but nobody's coming to save you. Like a lot of the advice that I would give back to my younger self are things like be more bold, or, save 10%, or some of these kind of concrete things we'll get into, but they all really revolve around the idea that I have to do these things myself. Nobody is coming to help me do these things.
Yeah.
What about you, Ben?
Yeah. The word that we used a lot in the wealth series was compounding. Mm-hmm. And compounding in the wealth series was talking about how money can grow massively like a hockey stick, slow and then fast over time. But that one concept, if I could teach myself that, I probably would. Like your health, it grows or you become unhealthy in that kind of slow and then all of a sudden way, right? And it's hard to get back.
Yep.
Money the same way. Knowledge. I wish I would have spent more time learning when I was younger instead of trying to cram all my learning years into the last 5 or 10.
Yep.
Friendships are the same way, Ben, right? Your friendships are the people that you surround yourself with and connect with and learn from and get mentored by. Those are a very similar compounding effect, right? Those things build and build and build. And 10 years later into a relationship, you're getting outsized results from the results you were getting in the beginning if you worked on those relationships.
Yeah. If you were to put that down into a phrase, Bob, I'd say relationships matter.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Relationships matter. Who you're around, who you hang around with, who you partner with, who you work for, who you let influence you, who you learn from, right?
Sounds like an episode.
All of those types of things. Absolutely. So let's dive into some of these topics. Let's start, Chad, with your bread and butter, health. If you were to go back to younger Chad, what would you tell younger Chad about health?
I would smack that bag of chips out of his hands. I'd smack that crap food that I was eating out of my hands, and I'd get myself off the sofa, right? That's when you said, what's the overall concept? I was thinking in health and wealth right off the bat. And it's so much easier to keep it than go back and fix it and do it right the first time. My health was a disaster. That's why I take it so seriously right now, Ben. I was up at 245 pounds. I was completely out of shape. I was eating blizzards on the sofa with you regularly.
Sofa.
Yes. Because I'd let my health just become something that wasn't a concern of mine. It was, I felt badly, so I ate, or I felt badly, so I did anything other than exercise. And I look at people now and I was like, if only I had. So if I were going back in time, I'd grab myself at age probably anywhere after 18 when I stopped being as active as I was. And I'd say every day, get into the gym, or every day, get outside, or every day, pay attention to what you're eating, because it gradually became the mistakes I made.
Bob, what would you say?
Very similar. I lasted a little bit longer than Chad in terms of, I probably stopped being super active, playing basketball, doing all those things that I enjoyed that kept me active around 27 or 28. And then I was pretty much non-active until my wife and I got married 5 years ago. So there was a good 10-year period. I didn't exercise. I didn't go to the gym. I stopped playing basketball. And I know when I went back, it was because my wife and I were getting married, and I'd put on a little weight and I wanted to look nice in my suit. And it was really, really hard to start again. In fact, it was so hard that I basically started to accomplish that thing for the wedding. And then I was like, stop again. And I think consistency would have been my advice to myself, right? Like, don't stop exercising. Cause like Chad just said, it's going to be a lot harder 10 years later to get started with it again. And look, I'm blessed in many ways in terms of I got a high metabolism and I can eat whatever I want. I don't put on weight, but that doesn't mean I'm healthy, right? That doesn't mean I could go out and run a mile or do 50 push-ups, right, Ben? Only recently, because of Corona, have I started to think about my health again. And, we do our push-up challenge. We talk about that a little bit on the podcast, but that's been something, and Chad kind of laughs at us, right? Because he's doing, a more developed workout. But for me, that's just been something that's gotten me in the routine of working out. And now I've added a few other exercises into that. And, but man, it was hard. And the only reason I was able to start is because we do an accountability group around that. Right. And so I'm not even doing it for myself. Last night, I didn't want to do it, but I was like, man, I got to put this up there for the guys. Right. Like, so don't stop. Like, your health is, a lot of us, we get busy with work and a family and whatever it is. And we make excuses for why we don't have time for it. But, we want to live long, healthy lives. And when you stop doing it, it's really hard to start.
Ben, I give you a hard time about health all the time. Right? I mean,
he does kind of bust my chops.
Absolutely. And I do it because I love you and I want you to be around longer. So being healthy. So you've gone up and down and up and down and up and down as we talk about your health situations. What's the advice you would have given yourself if you could go back?
The hardest thing in health for me has been managing office job, because I was used to working in the field, climbing telephone poles, being active, right? Doing that. Transitioning into an office job, managing stress. And because of both of those things, running out of energy at the end of the day. When you work 12, 14, 16-hour days and you get home and you're stressed, you don't have much of an energy, or, as our friends would say, a willpower to make better decisions. So one health thing that I think we all have to figure out a way to do is to manage stress. How do you manage stress in such a way that your world and chaos and the economy and all these things don't drag you down? That would be one lesson that I would tell my younger self, is learn how to manage stress at a young age.
It's a great tip you're giving yourself. And I'll tell everybody here, just before we move away from health, the endorphins that come from the exercise are going to help you control stress. It's a obvious answer there. And you can never, ever out-exercise a bad diet.
So what about money?
Oh,
so if you were to, Bob Stewart, go back in time and give yourself, a little bit of financial advice, what would it be?
I think there's two pieces for me that I just kick myself almost on a daily basis. The first one would be setting a budget or a threshold for how much money I wanted to save each month. I made a lot of money in my 20s and 30s, and I didn't have, I'm probably halfway through my 30s, but like a good 15 years, I didn't save a dime. I spent every dollar that I earned, and I basically lived against my paycheck. Now I had some jobs in there where I had kind of forced savings into a 401k or something like that. So, that's left over. But the reality is I should have lived below my means. I think the thing that happened to me too, and we've talked about this in past episodes, is the creep of lifestyle. Like, as I started out in the world and I was making $3,000 a month, and then I was making 4, and then I was making 6, and then I was making 8, and my lifestyle just crept right along with that. Right, I could have a nicer car, I could go to nicer restaurants, I could buy nicer clothes, and I let that creep happen. It wasn't until my mid 30s, really, when I met my wife that she was a saver, and it kind of changed my outlook. So that'd be the first thing. Like, don't let your lifestyle creep. And for most people, that becomes like setting I'm going to save X percent of what I earn every month. And obviously in the wealth series, we talked a lot about this. The other thing would be buy a house. I'm not sure what the hell I was doing. I was in real estate for years. I did own a house during that. I sold it, right? But just to buy and keep a house. In those younger years, I had great credit. I was making plenty of money. I should have done that. I don't know why I didn't. Those would be the two biggest ones for me.
Chad?
Yeah, well, I'm sitting here nodding my head. I mean, obviously, everybody listening can't see that. As I hear what Bob's saying, the difference for me, Ben, other than living on that budget, saving that money, I got myself into horrible financial situations. I think the lesson I would go back and tell myself is that nothing is going to last. And what I meant by that would be the good times and the bad times. So the bad times where I thought the world was over, I was put myself in being broke and all that situation, it wasn't going to last. I could always work my way out of it. And more importantly, the other side, I mean, I was in real estate when the bubble was growing. I mean, money was falling from the sky. We were printing money back then. And it was just to a point that I'd lived the lifestyle that it would never stop. And I would go back and tell myself, you got to put aside X amount every paycheck so that you're saving it. You got to put aside X amount for the IRS because they're coming no matter what. And nothing's going to last forever.
Yeah. For whatever reason, I've had an ability to make money my entire life. I mean, since I was, 7 or 8 years old, Chad, I would sell fruit that I picked from other people's trees in front of the Oso general store. I would take flies from my dad's fly box and set up a table and sell flies. And I think fly fishing, like fishing flies, right? My whole life, being raised poor, I put a high value on income. And I always chased the job that would pay me a little bit more because I never wanted to be back in a position where I was poor or, as we say, broke. So income's always been something, for whatever reason, has come somewhat easier to me than I think other people. And I don't know why, but it just does.
It's where you started. And I really believe, we've talked about it a bunch. Many of our listeners know your story. They know your history. They know where you came from. Bob's had some similarities in his story. I grew up mid to upper middle class life. I was spoiled on all that stuff. So I never had those lessons. I learned them the hard way later in life. Wish I had learned them earlier. You were able to have those, and we all now listen to what you've got to say when it comes to it because you've learned and you're willing to share.
Well, the thing, at a young age, I made money, but I also spent a lot of it, majority of it. And then I allowed my impatience and my desire to grow bigger faster to steal from all the hard work that I had done. And I got two good examples, guys. One, I put a home equity line of credit on a property, and I borrowed a bunch of money so that I could use it to basically fund a business that I wasn't running correctly. The business would have been better if I wouldn't have used that money to do it. Number two, I cashed out my 401k twice in my career. And I just go back and look at the amount of money that would be now, just on those times that I did that. It's massive. It's a life-changing amount of money. So don't borrow from your 401k, I would tell young Ben. Don't borrow equity out of your real estate, right? And I'd probably buy a lot more of it.
Oh, yes.
There's not a piece of property that dad ever drives by that he says, gosh, I'm sure glad I didn't buy that one when I was a kid.
Yep.
Now, one of the things that I think really determines the trajectory of your success is your ability and my ability to manage time. And of all the things that I could go back and tell myself, it's interesting because Bob and Chad picked our kind of topic today, is the advice to yourself, how do you use time? It's the number one thing that affects our health, our finances, our career, our businesses, and our relationships, right? How many of us have ruined or walked away from relationships because we had priorities somewhere else, right? Or how many of us have let our health go away because we didn't have time or we didn't make time, or money, we didn't take the time to learn, or whatever that might be. The ability to manage time, no matter what age you learn it at, will determine your end trajectory, your end potential. So Chad, if you were to give yourself some advice as a youngster about managing time, what would it be?
Don't procrastinate. Right. It would just simply come down. I was the kid who was up at 2 a.m. finishing the project that was due the next day that you had been assigned a month ago. Right. It would be use my time wisely. And to me, I was a social kid. So to me, it was I was putting my energies there instead of where it needed to be. And if it were having the priority sheets that we talk about, if it were knowing what my priorities were and pounding those out, come down to don't procrastinate. If I had to give myself just one piece of advice, it'd be get done what needs to get done now so you have the time to do the things you want after.
Yeah, use time wiser. Yeah. What about you, Bob?
So I have two concepts around this. One would be basically on your compounding discussion earlier, right? Is pick some amount of time. And I think, when I was younger and I didn't have kids and there was, I had less going, it would have been an hour, right? Pick an hour a day where you are purposely going to go out and learn something. And back then, Ben, we didn't have podcasts. We didn't have YouTube videos we could go watch all day long, right? It would have been, read a book for an hour or even for a half hour. Into my later 20s and 30s, that I probably would have been able a half hour, right? But to think of, an hour a day over the last 20 years, what I could have potentially put in my brain. And look, we did a lot of that, right? But for me, it was mainly focused on my job and my career, and I didn't get too much outside of my bubble. So it would have been just like learning something for an hour a day. The other thing I would say that I have just a horrible problem with, and this continues to dog me today, would be learn how to say no. Learn how to comfortably say no to people. Find whatever those strategies and techniques are. Ben, you've got some things that you do around that where you're kind of putting it back on them. But it would just be, I know if I'm working on other people's stuff, I'm not getting my own priorities done. And for my entire career, I've been a people pleaser and wanting to help people. And so just learning how to say no, and then, just the compounding effect of learning something every day, even if it's in half-hour increments.
My answer would be really close to that, Bob. It's to understand that there is a finite amount of things in our lives. Finite means fixed. There's a fixed amount. We have a fixed amount of time. We have a fixed amount of money. We have a fixed amount of years in the world. We have a fixed amount of, energy, all that. And as I say time is fixed, what that really means, Bob, is that everything you say yes to has a corresponding no. And I didn't always understand that by saying yes to one person, I was saying no to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 other people or other things. So if I could go back and tell myself one message, it would be that every yes has a corresponding no, and to ask yourself the question, what are you actually saying no to when you say yes? Now, that would solve a lot of our financial problems too. Instead of saying, I really want this, or I need this, or I'm going to buy this, if I sat back and asked myself, what is it that I can't do, or I can't buy, or I can't invest in, or I can't have by saying yes to this thing, it probably would have changed a lot of the decisions that we made. What's the next thing that we should talk about in our youth, Chad?
Well, I brought this one up already, right? It was social. So we all have our own different social histories, but Bob, let's put you on the spot first. if you could go back and talk to yourself at a younger age with the social life as kind of the category, what would the advice be you'd give yourself then?
I think it would be to have a wider group of friends. I had a really close knit, tight group of friends, and I'm friends with some of those guys all the way to today. There's a number of them. I wish I would have explored more friendships and connections at a younger age, because a lot of it's hard to make friends like as a 40-year-old, right? Like, I don't know where people make friends. You make them like at your kid's school, or so it would be to have a wider group of friends, I think. And then something that I kind of, these things naturally felt to me, it would be I had mentors, but I don't know if they were actually mentors, and I don't know that I intentionally seeked them out. I think the reality is they were probably more peers than they were mentors, right? But so like intentionally seeking out mentors would be something that I'd put kind of in that social bucket, just because I feel like had I looked to people who'd already been where I'd been, or were where I wanted to go, I maybe could have figured out the path to get to that place easier. And in much the same way that, that our friend Cameron is asking us these questions, right? Well, I could have been doing this throughout my career and finding people that I wanted to kind of learn and grow from.
I believe that in business, your company needs a board of advisors. Mm-hmm. But I think in life you do too. What would it be like if you looked at your social circle, not just as who you go have a beer with or who you go to the movies with or whatever you do, right? But as the 5 people that I hang around with, they're my board of advisors. Who would that be, right? And you would have your health friend and your business friend and your finance friend and your faith friend and your person that's really good at relationships or marriage or whatever, right? You'd pick your board of advisors. So in social, I gravitate towards people that I can give value to and people that can give value back to me, this mutual relationship. And I would go back to my younger self, and there are definitely relationships that we should have got out of faster, or just moved on, or found that were relationships that were missing in our lives, both friends and, dating kind of thing. One of the jokes that I say is right girl, wrong time, wrong girl, right time, right? Mm-hmm. Same with friendships, right? Sometimes they run their course, and sometimes you have to be purposeful about going out there and finding that right person for the right time.
It's so interesting that that's the one that you would give yourself as advice, Ben, because I absolutely lived that. I remember grade 10, and I almost failed grade 10. And I remember coming home at the end of grade 10, and my dad basically said to me, you have 2 choices. You either get new friends or you're grounded all of grade 11 now. You're not spending your time with those kids. And of the 5 that I had, 1 is passed away now, and 1 is in prison. And the other 3 aren't really doing much for themselves, sadly. And I focused on a new group of friends. And they're all highly successful people, and they've been my friends ever since. So it's interesting that you say that, because that then segues to what I would give myself, and it's trust those people, right? If you're going to put those people in your circle of friends, you got to trust them. When they tell you something is wrong, you got to hear it, because we never see things ourselves. It's the old forest through the tree, or the trees through the forest, whichever way that saying always goes, that we don't see what we're doing, and our friends who care and love us enough, they do. So you've got to trust them, which is what led to the intervention that happened in my life for a social situation and a relationship that needed to change, thanks to the relationships I could trust. So Bob's right. Have that great group around you. You're right. Make sure that it's a specific and well-balanced group around you. And then I would tell myself to trust in that group.
Is there any other areas that you think are worth talking about today?
There's always areas I'd go back and tell myself, change is inevitable, right? That's not necessarily in a specific area, but I would tell myself, change is happening. I mean, follow your heart and know that change is going to happen.
What about career advice? If you guys were to go back, because we've all worked with lots of companies and lots of people, and we've had lots of positions and done lots of jobs. The joke for me is, I'm basically a janitor and a CEO my entire life, and I've been somewhere between those two things. So if we were to give ourselves some career advice to our younger self, what would it be, Bob?
So I think for career advice, one of the first things I would say is, like, most of the time when you come into a company, you think that there's like a way things are done, and that's the way they're doing, and I'll just do them that way. One of the first things I would say is you can make yourself super valuable inside a company if you actually bring solutions and improvements to whatever the processes are. A lot of people just get in a job and they just do that job, right? They never look for ways to improve that job. And I think some of the places in my career where I've become a really valuable asset in the company is because I've said, why do we do it that way? Maybe we could do it this way, and that would be a little bit better. Most people just do it the way it was always done. And so I would say, always be looking to kind of insert yourself into processes and different things inside of a company that you might work in with the goal being to improve that thing, not just to show up each day and do your job.
Chad, what would you say about your career?
I've had lots of careers. Just like you've done a lot of things. I've been a server. I've owned a baseball school, worked on cruise ships, the entertainment industry. I've had lots of opportunities.
Didn't you work in a big Vegas show?
I did. Yeah, behind the scenes effects, blowing things up and all of that.
Who was the show?
Well, it was called Effects.
Oh.
It was at the MGM. Michael Crawford, David Cassidy was our star.
David Cassidy.
Rick
That's
Springfield,
cool. Yeah.
Tommy Toon. There you go. There were the four. The advice I'd give myself for career would be follow the right leader. And I think that's the thing that I look back on when I got into certain businesses. It was finding the right person to follow. And I would realize when it was time to leave and move on. So if you can make sure you're finding the right leader to follow, it's not pick a career path when you're 18 and stick to it your whole life. I actually love the fact that I've had multiple experiences because I think it helps me bring a different look at my industries and my careers as I've moved on. It's just making sure you've got the right person leading the way.
Yeah, mine is pretty much the same. It would be who you work with matters. Yeah. I had a great start to my career in corporate America where I worked for TCI, AT&T Broadband, and Comcast. And I never changed jobs. The company's always changed. And who I work for always changed. I realized in that career that I was number 14,117, and that was my badge ID, and that's all anybody knew me as, right? I was just a number.
Right.
Who you work with, who you work around, and who you work for, it matters, right? Yeah. And you need to make sure that you're getting yourself in relationship with the people in your company that matter. I have a lot of people that probably think you're in relationship with these leaders or with these companies or with these people because they sought you out. No. I knocked on their door, I emailed, I called, I visited, I delivered items of value, I sent gifts, I offered to do things for free. I earned the right to be in relationship with people and companies that matter because I was purposeful about it. So I think that would be, as a advice back to myself, would be skip those partnerships, skips those careers or jobs and those relationships with either people I didn't even know or I never would know, or around people that I knew in my heart from day one they were not to the same caliber, or they didn't have the same long-term vision that I had.
All right. So that's a lot of categories we've covered to give to advice to ourselves back when. Let's look ahead, because now we're going to be 10, 15 years ahead before we know it, blink of an eye, and we're going to be going, boy, I wish back in 2020 I listened to myself when I did whatever. Ben, what's the advice you give to the future Ben that's coming?
I always say the scariest thing for me is not where I'm at. It's looking ahead 5 or 10 years and realizing I'm still in the same spot. That's the scariest thing that can happen to me. I could lose everything and I would be okay. But continuing to have nothing change in my life is super scary. So I think the future Ben needs to hear, or the present Ben needs to hear, so that we
However that works,
we can
right?
get there. Yeah, I'm all super confused now. Is that what are the areas of my life that we need to change, right? And I think they're probably been spoken about today already. Who you work with matters. Learn to use time better. Don't let your health slip away, right? All of these things are all the same message, but you can never stop learning. You can never stop. You haven't mastered any of those subjects. Your life is that journey, and to the extent at which you embark on that journey will be to the extent at which your destination happens.
Okay. Bob, how about you?
I think mine would be like be purposeful, right? Like, every day when you get up and you show up, if you don't have a purpose or something you want to accomplish, you're gonna sway in the wind. You're gonna say yes to too many people that aren't moving you towards your goal, because maybe you don't even have that goal or that purpose. So for me, spent a lot of time in the last year kind of trying to figure out, like, what is that purpose and how does what I get up and do every day kind of drive towards that purpose. And look, I don't know that I haven't figured out, right? But continuing to be intentional and focus on that thing is I think something that's going to serve me well for the next 10 years.
And I'll take it out here. I think that, we've given Ben, you said it really well. We've given ourselves a lot of advice through this call as we look back. I think the advice I give my future me is the old saying, right? When's the best time to plant a tree? It was 20 years ago. And boy, I really wish I listened to myself back then about this advice. Now is the second best time to plant a tree. So am I going to go back and listen to this episode? Am I going to actually start to implement these things? Am I going to actually start to put a percentage aside of every check? Am I going to keep my health moving? Am I going to trust that group of people I put around me, et cetera, et cetera, and et cetera? Now, for all of our listeners out there, your challenge is to take a moment and think about what's the advice you would have given yourself in all of these categories 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago. And once you have that advice, go find somebody in your world at that point and share the advice with them and help them make that advice happen. And then in our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/win-make-give, come in there and share with us. Let us know what that one key piece of advice you would have given yourself would be. Make sure that you're sharing this episode with others so that they can learn from our mistakes. And like Cameron, maybe they're 23 years old and still have an opportunity to move in the right direction early. Until our next episode, make sure you remember to rate this one, review this one, and share that feedback with us. And wash those hands, and as always, do good.